Lazarus, where do you have your Jack Adams situation?
I think right now I'm still, as good as Rick Tocchett's been, Spencer Carberry now you can say about the Capitals. I think for the overall consistency of the Philadelphia Flyers this year, when I don't think anyone on the planet picked them to be in the playoff picture, not only at this time, but to have a legit shot at making it, I think you have to go with John Tortorella. I just what he's gotten from that group, he comes in last year and basically changes the culture into this season. And, you look on paper, it's not a sexy team at all. Right. And,
not on the ice either. Like, though, they don't have
not
the
on the ice
guys
either
on that roster.
No, but call it what you want also with like outside noise being outside noise. They've dealt with a lot of shit this year, like, off the ice. And it hasn't really affected their room. Like, I'm not going to lie. I was in their locker room 2 days ago because they were in New York, and I talked to Morgan Frost, and I got to like talk to Scott Lawton a little bit, but that was like more off the record. Like, that's a fun ass team. Like the Flyers, Torts gets all the attention with the media and stuff, but the room loves him. I could really sense it. And I'm around a lot of the road teams that come into New York City. And I would say that the Flyers locker room after a morning skate was probably the loudest or second loudest room that I've been in as far as camaraderie goes after a morning skate, next to the Florida Panthers.
That's my insider.
Yeah, I love that.
That's actually an insider.
That's some good
literal
good news.
Insider shit. So
that's to me.
For you. I feel like Torts' stock has dropped a little bit over the past month or so. And
but just for the outsiders, though, I feel like, right?
Yeah, maybe. Carberry for sure, I think is picking up some steam with how that team has been putting it together. I'll ask you your feelings on the Washington Capitals in a little bit, because that's been a hot button topic in this circle for a couple days. One of the names that I've kind of been surprised hasn't been louder. Like, Tocchett's name has come up a lot, but what about Andrew Brunette? Like, Andrew Brunette and what he's done in Nashville has been nothing short of amazing to me.
That was my number one talking point for this conversation. It was going to be like, why don't we talk about Andrew Brunette? That team, and granted, this is a year where like all of the, maybe with the exception of the Capitals, like all of the wild card teams are real ass teams, like teams that can win series, potentially go on a run. I take the Predators so fucking seriously. I have a future on them to win the cup. I don't think they're going to win the cup, but like if they make a run, would any of us be surprised? And for where they started at the beginning of the season, Pete, if we want to do a little morning skate talk, we were at Bruins Predators morning skate, and we were like, man, they're not there. They're not going to be there. But what an interesting roster. They like if Ryan O'Reilly becomes this.
Misfit toys.
Yes, that's what, we were like, it's a bunch of broken toys. And if they could come together, we could really see what Brunette can be as a coach. And he's like top 3 for me. And I'll let you weigh in, Laz, on Brunette.
Well, off that note, I know that this isn't how the Jack Adams works, and maybe it shouldn't be considered, but also consider what the New Jersey Devils were last year versus what they are this year without Andrew Brunette. I think that you've seen an impact be transferred from New Jersey to Nashville. Like, Andrew Brunette has been a very good and important coach at every stop that he's been, from Florida to New Jersey and now to Nashville.
I got to give an update on the chat, by the way. Laz,
I won the hearts over.
The scoop that you gave about the Flyers having a fun room was very well received by the chat. I've never seen them turn positively on someone so quickly. They're now discussing, is Lazarus out of the doghouse because he broke some news about the Flyers having a good room?
Well, I want to out of the doghouse a little bit. Like,
I'm sure I'll get back in there.
You're hanging around the doghouse.
Yeah, the cage is open, but I'm not out of it yet. But I want to add one thing to that too. Like, just thinking back to last year where both teams were. Like, Andrew Brunette, all credit in the world. It's funny. I think Greg Wyshynski made the joke to me at the deadline, the Devils should trade back for Andrew Brunette. Like, that's what they needed. But I think when you look at where Nashville was last year to where Philly was last year and where they both are now, like, yeah, Nashville didn't have a great year last year. They had a lot of injuries. They were basically playing with an AHL roster at the end of the year, but they finished 3 points out of the playoffs. Like, it's not like they were this, rock bottom team that Philly was last year. And, they still have UC Saros in goal. They still have Roman Josi on the back end. They get Ryan O'Reilly. They have Philip Forsberg, who's on a tear. Like, Philadelphia doesn't really have these pieces. And that's why I think what Tortorella has done, and again, like, Nashville had a bad start. Like, Philly has done it constantly throughout the entire year. They've been in a playoff spot since like day 5, and they haven't dropped out. So I think the consistency of Tortorella and what he's gotten that group to do when they lose Carter Hart to everything that went on with him, the Cutter Gauthier drama happens. No one wants to go to Philly. I think, Sean Couturier gets hurt, right? And then he comes back, scratches the captain, but the room reacts in a positive way. There's just so many different tactics that Tortorella has done to get this group to buy in. And I think that's just what's been so impressive with the pieces on that roster, what he's been able to get them to do.
All right, I'm gonna throw out some other names too. I think this is the most interesting Jack Adams race that there's been in a long time. You can have a list of 6-7 guys that may be worthy of being finalists. How about Rick Bowness in Winnipeg? Because not only, like, I know there's talent there, but there was a lot of talk about how dysfunctional that room was for a while. And on top of that, the entire system that Winnipeg plays has kind of flipped on its head. They have been a bad defensive team for years, and now suddenly they're a very, very staunch defensive team.
Days before the season started, the conversation around the Jets was like, this is the year it craters. This is where all the shit hits the fan. Scheifele's going to get out of there. Hellebuck's going to get out of there. What? They're both staying? What? And then they end up, for a while, being the best team in the NHL, which I don't think we thought was going to be super duper sustainable, but they're right there. I just mainly agree with your point that, Pete, that there's 5 or 6 or 7 Jack Adams deserving guys. Like Bowness, I wouldn't give it to. I started the conversation with a tinfoil hat thing of what if Jim Montgomery keeps, in the eyes of the Jacobs, costing them money and they fire him because he doesn't get out of the first round. You make a case for Jim Montgomery. If the Bruins win the President's Trophy, it's hard not to think that he should at least be a finalist because he loses so many good players, Dmitry Orlov, Pete, chief among them, and ends up bouncing back to potentially win the President's Trophy with a bunch of guys on 1-year contracts. Like, he has a case. So many guys have cases. Laviolette, your guy.
I was just going to say, I haven't even heard his name once. And, obviously I could plan to the Homer thing with the Rangers. Hedl goes down to a season-ending injury. Shesterkin gets hurt for a month. Fox gets hurt for 5 weeks. The Rangers battled adversity for a little bit, and they have not dropped from first place either all year. They've been at the top of the Metro since the first month of the season. And, Laviolette, again, is a guy who not everyone was so pumped about when the Rangers hired him. The Rangers got bounced in the first round. It was an old school coach that hasn't won a cup in almost 20 years. It wasn't really a sure thing. And what he's done to this team has been insanely impressive. I don't think anyone would have picked the Rangers to finish first in the Metro this year, including myself. I had them in third. So,
bit of a hater.
I think he deserves to be at least talked about, right?
Yeah, I think his name belongs in the conversation. Another guy's name who belongs in the conversation, Chris Knobloch. That revived that team from the dead. And the buy-in, I know you can make the case that they have all the talent in the world, and they do. Yeah. They have 2 of the best players in the world, and that probably hurts him. But the buy-in across the board from the Oilers has been very apparent to me, and I think that puts his name in the conversation as well. I mean, we're talking about the Oilers as a lock for the playoffs when that team, we were saying they would have so many things would have to go right for them to even be in the discussion based off the start that they had.
You do have to consider, though, Pete, when you talk about the buy-in, the reason the Oilers can buy in is because Zach Hyman's parents are giving them money to do that. So
it's fair.
Just, I guess, push back on the Chris Knobloch. It's very easy for people to buy in. Knobloch and Paul Maurice were the 2 funny. How have we not brought these guys up yet? I like Chris Knobloch a lot, probably more than Evander Kane does right now. I also, though, would not put him in my top 3-ish. And I also wouldn't with Paul Maurice because Paul Maurice is just quickly I'm treating them as Stanley Cup champions. I'm looking at the Panthers at points the way that I look at like the Golden Knights, where I'm like, well, they've just been there, done that. They know what they're doing there. But really, when you look at the season they've had, he deserves to be in the conversation. This is like this happens in the draft sometimes, where you're like, any other year, Jack Eichel would be the first overall pick. A lot of these coaches, any other year, they'd be a Jack Adams finalist, but this is just a buzzsaw this year. It's an interesting conversation.
Yeah, Paul Maurice, I think, has maybe the weakest case of anybody that we've mentioned, just because that team was in the Stanley Cup final last year, and a year before that, they were the President's Trophy winners. A lot of the times, fair or unfair, Jack Adams is the most surprising team, or kind of like maximizing the least impressive roster. When you look at the Florida Panthers roster, I think most people expected them to be pretty good.
And in that sentiment, how is it not Philly? How?
Yeah, I think Laz, I know he's got inside information on the vibes, but you've kind of talked me into Torts here.
Yeah.
I know that.
I mean, but what if Washington finishes above Philly? Like, if Washington finishes above Philly, I think you look at Washington's roster, especially the changeover at midseason, and how many guys from Hershey that and I know that he's like got a relationship with the guys from Hershey, but I don't know how you can make that case for Torts and then not give it to Carberry if the Caps finish above the Flyers.
Yeah, I know these aren't that these aren't the betting odds, but I think that the top three is probably Tocchet, Torts, and Carberry. And we'll see how that ends up. I agree with you, Pete. If Washington ends up passing Philly, then it's so much more of an accomplishment. But to Lazarus's point, that's my insider, they've dealt with so much more shit in Philly.
Yeah.
Like, you want to talk about fucking distractions, the goalie, Cutter Gauthier, the Anthony Sanfilippo guy, Kevin Hayes' fingerprints. There is all sorts of shit. They've fucking scratching the captain. And I can't remember if we discussed this on or off the show, Pete, but so many Flyers fans would die for John Tortorella right now because they're in this position they did not expect. When I was saying, like, hey, Torts has got to take it easy with all this Couturier stuff, I had Flyers fans texting me being like, no, you're wrong. Whatever Torts does works, so we fucking trust him. And I'm like, you like John Tortorella more than you like Sean Couturier. That is crazy to me, but it speaks to, like, all the levers he's pulled for the most part have worked out. So that is Jack Adams material. That's all I'll say on the matter.
We all silly like the mayor.